Hello, everyone. Welcome to this second session at our B+HR lab, inspiring Gen A and Gen Z. Really wonderful to have you all with us today. Hope you liked the previous session. And for this part of the event, we'll be having a discussion with, some either young people or people who work a lot with young people. So having said that, I would like to introduce you to the panel. First of all, we have An Trinh. She's a master's student at the University of Chicago and a research assistant at New York University in Shanghai. Second, we have Rinaldi Istanto. He is an expert staff to the Minister of State-Owned Enterprises for Global Value Chains for the government of Indonesia. Third, we have Shagun Sethi. She's a manager on programs and operations for Pontoka, which is an ESG firm. She's the founder and CEO of Nuna and an academic research fellow at Leading Cities. And finally, we have Watsal Rajbandi. He is the co-founder and managing director of Docha Private Limited, a company based in Nepal. We are hoping also to introduce you to a final speaker who has not joined us yet, but hopefully will join us very soon. Having said that, this session is really about hearing from young people with a diverse set of backgrounds and professional careers, and hear from them what has been their experience as a young person working on responsible business issues, sustainable development issues. What were some of the challenges that they faced? How did they overcome these challenges? And most important of all, what lessons can we learn from these challenges and the opportunities that they had, and kind of translate that for recommendations for the UN agencies and CSOs that are attending today. So having said that, I would really like to dive deep straight into the questions with the participants, and there will also be enough opportunity to ask them questions yourself and to engage with them directly. So I'd really encourage people to put your questions in the chat, and yeah, we'll see how we go. So yeah, I'm really excited to start with An. You are originally from Vietnam and you're studying in the US now. And so I was really curious, like, when did you become interested in sustainable development issues? How did you become aware of them? So let's start with that.
Yeah, so first of all, nice to meet you, everyone. And my name is An. I'm a master's student currently studying sociology, and also my bachelor is in geography and urban studies. So I guess I have been aspiring to become an architect when I was really young, no longer though. But I think I always want to really love trees, and I want, my design to have a lot of trees in it, like a 13 years old kid. So I think that's when it started. And later on, because I read a lot of books, so I was also interested in, sustainable design and just green urban landscaping in general. And in high school, I have the opportunity to study in Canada. And I think a lot of the theories about sustainable development I learned from there. I learned from all my friends from, I guess, all over the world. And especially the school was really focused on how to have really immerse in nature, and then learn about how to be very responsible to the environment, but also to the land that we live on, to the people surrounding us. There are a lot of issues with First Nation in Canada. So I think sustainable development, I learned then, is not only about environment, but also about social and economic issues that surrounding the people as well. So I think that has led me, and I think a lot of my friends in high school, get into a more sustainable and aspiring to, I guess, bringing more peace into the future. And that's why I study a lot of social science at the University of Chicago. It's very theoretical the way we have learned it, but I also have a chance to, I guess, practice more in my internships and my research. So yeah, I think that's how it started. I think a lot of through like education and books.
Yeah, that's really great. And you know, you've looking at your resume, your LinkedIn profile, you really have a lot of experience already. And actually, I forgot to mention, this is perhaps interesting to note, is that you were also an intern at UNDP's Business and Human Rights team, right? So you are actually
over the summer.
Yeah, you're actually a lot engaged on these things. And so what I was really curious to hear from you as well, you having lived in different parts of the world, like in your home country or in your home region, like how much are young people aware and engaged on, you know, whatever we call them sustainable development issues, responsible business issues. Like, do you think this is something that kind of lives among them, or yeah, so what's your view on that? Could you please elaborate?
Yeah, so I think I would hold somewhat a pessimistic view because I'm from a very more rural area of Vietnam. So I guess the thing that we see on like the news and then, you know, the stories that we heard are the story from, I guess, very outstanding people. I think the average outstanding youth of Vietnam or of Southeast Asia has very, I guess, a lot of a lot of exciting journeys that they have taken to become, you know, more sustainable, like to develop exciting businesses. A lot of them have become entrepreneurs. So I think the thing that we hear every day is a thing of like success people, I guess, of more of. But I also think that is a smaller population, I would say, because a lot of that coming from, you know, people who have been educated, people who, I guess, have a certain environment and certain like education that they got. For example, me, I was fortunate enough to have a good, I guess, certain type of education to learn about these issues. But the average youth in Vietnam or probably in other parts of Southeast Asia don't have that, I guess, comfortable environment to learn more about sustainable issues, I would say. There are other, you know, acute daily lives, mundane burdens that they probably have that might be preventing them from thinking about these, you know, bigger and larger picture. And we actually do not hear from their voices that much. So I do think that we do need some more, I guess, mass education or mass communications that cater towards more disprivileged, underprivileged youth in Vietnam, and don't, you know, just reach the top, the stellar, the one who like read English, the one who, you know, have access to, for example, like media of the UNDP. That's probably only a very selected like population of youth have access to that, or like actually, you know, like following the UNDP, for example. So yeah, generally, I'm not super optimistic about the general knowledge of the youth, especially from, you know, what like my conversation with the friends around me. But I do think there are very great people, like the friends who are talking here. I think that they are doing extremely awesome work, and I think they are making a lot of change. But I think we need to have more people like that.
Great, thank you. And I mean, this also connects quite well with what Livio said in his introductory remarks, that you know, it's really a challenge also to how do you connect with young people, as you said, not just only the ones that might have the privilege to learn about these things in school, but really how does this you know, how do you reach everyone, basically? So thank you so much for those reflections. And I would like to turn to Shagun. Shagun, I was wanting to ask you, is like, how do you engage with young people through your work? And do you have any idea about, you know, what are their attitudes on responsible business? And do you see, like, from what you observe through your work and your youth engagement, is there any role in particular that you see like clear cut for them?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great segue also, but thank you so much for having me, Kevin. But it's a great segue because while I agree that, it's difficult to kind of collect and collate young people from across the world and, kind of have that training that, Anne was talking about right now in terms of motivating young people towards these issues. I disagree in one thing, which is that I believe that young people across the world, and I've had the privilege to work with young people from over 100 countries over the past 2 years in my position as Director of Global Leadership at B+HR World, which I'll talk to you guys about in a minute. But I think, engaging with all of these different young people that I've had the privilege of engaging with is that we are very, very motivated from wherever you are. So the lack of understanding, the lack of education, the lack of, for example, these barriers that exist in society doesn't matter because these young people come with this raw passion for change. And so it's kind of now the ball is in our court on how we engage with them, how much training we give them, and how many doors we open for them. So it's not like young people do not exist or that they are not passionate about these issues or they don't care about sustainability. In fact, I disagree. I think a lot of young people at grassroots levels are very, very concerned about these issues. They are keeping their eyes and ears open for what's happening across the world. It's just that those bridges do not exist for them to have the platforms to learn and to speak about these things, right? And that's where I think that this kind of engagement plays a huge role, which is where I'll talk about my role with B+HR World. So B+HR World was this new global social movement that started in the wake of the pandemic without any kind of push or anything like that. We've never met anyone in the organization, which is a little crazy because we've been working for 2 years. We don't know anyone in the entire ecosystem. But I've had the, I don't even know how to say it, but it's the greatest honor of my life to work with young people from over the world. And we're up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., all of our different time zones, just trying to get stuff done to create this, better place for a world that we live in. And so I truly believe that how we engage with young people, to answer your question, is through different means. But the first is to open the door and to let them in and to make them a part of our ecosystems and a part of our decision-making bodies. Because if we don't have young people and young voices at the table, and we don't have young people and young voices be part of the change that we want to see, and we only see them as foot soldiers, which is, to be honest, how it exists today, right? We sit in boardroom meetings, take decisions, and then we're like, well, let's get a couple of young people as volunteers or interns. And then they go ahead and implement that change, right? And I think that that system is quite problematic because then you're gatekeeping decision-making. And I think decision-making is where our voices are extremely important because we bring with us this kind of raw passion, which we want to marry with the kind of vulnerable leadership that exists. And so that bridge is truly what needs to be created to kind of usher in this era where we are creating more diverse and more inclusive decisions for the world ahead.
Great, thank you so much, Shagun. Just as a side remark, I see that Vishal has joined us, which is our final speaker. So I'll just want to introduce him briefly. So with us today is Vishal Prashad. He's a campaigner for Pacific Islands students fighting climate change, as well for World's Youth for Climate Justice. And Vishal recently also has been to COP26. So let's see if we can ask him some questions about that in a minute. But I just wanted to go back to Shagun. Shagun, thank you so much for your reflections. And similar to Ann, you also have quite an international profile, right? You're Indian, you studied in the US. So I was wondering, could I ask you, did you notice any differences in the attitudes of youth when comparing the US and India? Or perhaps, I mean, if you want to make that distinction, which is perhaps not as good, not as sharp between global North and global South.
Sure. I love this question, by the way, because whenever I'm asked this question, I'm able to reflect on society in general. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I think I speak for the global South when I say this. If you look at sociology, the way the global South functions, and I speak for India, is that our education, our training, our kind of upbringing is all very society centric. What I mean by that is that in everything that you learn or everything that you want to become, right, you're constantly thinking about well, how do I become a productive member of society? Or what I will do, what is the consequences that will have on the people around me, right? And we're constantly forced to think about that. Well, what will your mother think about this? What will your aunts think about this? You need to kind of work on those things, right? But also, and one of the good things about this is that our society is very cohesive. What I mean by that is the rich and the poor coexist in the same spaces. So if you look at India, for example, the richest man in India lives in this huge skyscraper in Bombay. But it's a well-known fact that right behind, I mean, there's a wall that is the same wall, which connects that same skyscraper to the biggest slum in the country, right? And so that kind of coexistence, I think, is where we grow up. So we're not, blinded by these echo chambers that we're in, where we're privileged and elite, and we're kind of, restricted to this educated class. We're seeing the haves and have-nots in front of us. We're seeing people who don't have access to food and water and blankets in winter, right? And that's the stark opposite of what you see in the US. I was very, very privileged to go and study at Columbia University, which was life-changing. That's when actually, for the first time, I heard the word business and human rights being put together in a sentence, and I, got a little surprised. But at Columbia, or in New York City, the way it is focused and the way education and society is focused is very individual-centric. So everything over there, for example, was, putting in their force to make me a better person, to make me a better me, and not about the 10 people around me, which is great because I learned a lot. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, what happens is, if you look at New York and you look at the map of New York, what they do is they believe in the principle of out of sight, out of mind. So if poverty exists and if people who are underserved and underprivileged exist in New York, what they've done is they've created Harlem, and they said, well, all of you can go there so that the Upper East Side doesn't have to worry about seeing you in front of their houses, right? The problem with that is that we're raising a generation of young people who don't know what poverty looks like, who don't understand what differences look like, who don't understand that in today's world, we still have these kind of stark inequalities and this rising gap between the rich and the poor, right? And that's a problem, because still you don't see something till something is not tangible. You're not able to campaign for it, right? So for example, even if you take the climate example, when we say, glaciers are melting or ice caps are melting or polar bears are going extinct, people are like, well, that's cute, but like, what do we do about it, right? That's their response, because it's so intangible, it's so distant. The minute you make it about them and you're like, well, there was this huge fire that happened in Australia and in California, and there's a rising sea level because of which there are floods in Chennai and Kerala and Bangladesh, that's when people are like, well, this is a problem, this is tangible. So that's where I think there's a huge difference between the global north and the global south. I think the global south is raising a generation of young leaders who are seeing injustice, who are seeing problems in front of them, and they don't see it as a choice, which is why you see so many young people over here ready to speak.
Thank you, Shagan. Couldn't have hoped for such an excellent analysis. And yeah, let us see what we can learn from this, and what this means for responsible business. And as you said, like differences between the societies, individualistic and more community-based. So that would be really interesting to discuss further. And actually, I would like to ask Vishal a similar question. I'll just check quick, Vishal. Is everything working? Your audio, everything okay? Yeah. All right. That's great. So Vishal, you're from Fiji, Pacific Island. You've recently been to COP26. Of course, your country really is facing devastating impacts now or in the future from climate change. And so I wanted to ask you the same thing. Like, do you see a different attitude of young people in Fiji when compared to other parts of the world? Perhaps again, global north, global south. And is there anything you observe from this through your work in general, or maybe at COP26? Yeah, if you could please share with us your ideas, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin, and big Bula Vinaka to everyone joining in and watching. Thank you for this opportunity to be part of this panel and be part of this discussion. It's a very interesting question. The perspective and people's perspective on climate change, youth perspective on climate change, is essentially quite similar, I would say, across, if you're talking about global north and global south, there's an understanding that there's the reality of climate change is real, that there's a threat to frontline communities and also a threat to themselves and their livelihoods. But what I would say is a difference between, say, global south countries and many of these countries that are at the front line of climate change is that, and those countries and young people from especially global north countries, is that a lot of times our understanding on climate change can be very textbook, very theoretical in nature. And so it's essentially, if you ask someone, and we came across this at COP many times, when you speak with people who are not from climate vulnerable countries or not from per se global south countries, they have this understanding of climate change, or we have this understanding of climate change that can be very limited in nature. It's what you learn in school, what's been told in the media. But versus people, say, in the frontline communities, they have experience in climate change. They are what some people have called us as living experts of what climate change is. So there's this dichotomy, there's this distinction between people who know just from head knowledge what climate change is, and they want to take this head on, and then there's this difference between people who feel this on a day-to-day basis, who have a lot of passion on what is climate change affecting in their lives, what they stand to lose, versus some of the people who just have this very narrow head knowledge on climate change. I think that's something we came across, and it's not, I wouldn't blame anyone for this understanding. It's just that it's what reality and circumstances have brought. Some people know more, and some people are right at the forefront of this. That's what makes them, gives this extra layer of understanding and extra layer of realization based on the gravity of the crisis that they face on a day-to-day basis.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that resonates also quite well with what Shagan and Ann said to an extent, but then also interesting to hear, of course. I mean, it must come at no surprise that in Fiji, of course, and similar countries, the urgency among young people is much more, right? They're fighting for their future. So, and I think we can talk about this a little bit more. I just wanted to move to Rinaldi now. And Rinaldi, so you work for the Indonesian government, right? This again, you have a very different background, again, from the other speakers. I was kind of curious to hear, can you maybe tell us about how your department or the government in general in Indonesia, like, do they value people? How do they value people? Is it a priority, or should it become a priority? Yeah, so if you could perhaps reflect a little bit on that, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. First of all, thank you for the UNDP for having me to participate in this fascinating discussion. Yeah, I'm from Indonesia. Now I'm working in the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprises of the Republic Indonesia. Specifically, I become the expert staff of Minister for the global value chains. I have a master's degree in globalization and development. Basically, my job is analyzing the potential opportunity for the state-owned enterprises to participate in global value chains. And then, yeah, this Minister of State-Owned Enterprises manage 41 state-owned enterprises in Indonesia. Regarding to your question about does your organization value young people and how? Let's start with, can you guess how old am I now, Kevin?
Well, asking me might be, I might know. It was 25, right?
Yeah. Yeah, correct. I'm 25 years old, and I'm one of the youngest expert staff in the office. Most of my colleagues in the office about 40 years old. In the ministry SOEs, we also have Mr. Teddy Barata, a deputy of human resource, who is the youngest deputy in Indonesia. Many of the minister's staff from state-owned enterprises come from a young generation, and it can be argued that there is no age discrimination in the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprises. As long as you have capabilities and competencies to do that, there is no age restrictions. Furthermore, as a ministry which supervises the Indonesia state-owned enterprises, we also apply the principle of youth inclusion in our 41 state-owned enterprises. The Minister, State-owned Enterprises, Mr. Eric Thohir, has set target for millennials and also for the women to sit on the board of director positions. He wants to increase the number of BOD from the young generation into 15% and 25% for the women by 2024. We also established a young association for the young generation in state-owned enterprises to associate and to share their knowledge. And those organizations also have coaching and mentorship program to enhance young generation and also women capabilities. In a sense, from my story, Ministry State-owned enterprises has shown a massive progress in the youth affirmation. The key of this institution to value young people is about the commitment and the real action to provide a space for the youth to grow.
Thank you, Reynaldi. And yeah, I think we can discuss this a little bit more later on. But what I find interesting in this respect is that, I mean, the UN Secretary General quite recently came out with a report, Our Common Agenda, and there he argues that, you know, youth involvement within government or within political processes is often tokenism, but really glad to hear actually that here in Indonesia we see really encouraging developments and you know, the things you outlined. So we'll come back to you, and I'll ask you a little bit more to give some examples, so I see how we can make this a little bit more tangible. But now I would like to turn to Watsal. So Watsal, we spoke before, and you've worked with UNDP's Youth Collab team, and you're a social entrepreneur. Right, so you own a company, Docha, and you make, amongst other things, I believe, you make shoes, and you try to respect people and the communities and then the environment in which you operate. So I was really curious to hear from you. Can you briefly tell us about your company and how it seeks to do these things, right? So respect and contribute to human rights.
First and foremost, thank you so much, Kevin, and the organizers. It's a privilege to be a part of this panel. So I am Watsal, and I am a co-founder of Doja. We infuse art, culture, and traditions of different communities in Nepal, infuse it within our products, which is mostly footwear, accessories, and other handmade products as well. So as said earlier, like the community empowerment and the indigenous skill is what we have in core of our business, and we respect the inclusivity and we respect the diversity in our communities as well. So talking about how we respect and seek to respect human rights, there are two forefronts of how we do it, which is one inside of the organization and one outside of it. So when we talk about inside of the organization, it's mostly respecting the wage of the workers and giving more fair wages and having better industry practices. In Nepal, it's very much it's run very much in a rudimentary system where footwear and the labors in footwear are not so much kept into limelight where when it comes to human rights and basic necessities in a workplace. So we have a proper workplace condition, and we give out fair wages, and we abide by the labor laws which are given by the nation as well. And when we come and talk about outside of the company, it's mostly related to the supply chain and also the community and the nearby surroundings of the workplace and the workplace facilities. So when we talk about supply chain, we make sure that they also abide by the labor laws given by the Constitution of Nepal, and we have also technical aspect. We also examine the technical aspect of how they are procured, how they are made. So we take all of those things into account. And when it comes to the community around our facilities, we make sure there is good health and safety assurances around the facility. The incident management is there, which also resonates with a lot of manufacturing industries, hazardous practices that is being seen in all around Southeast Asia. And we make sure that it's also taken into account and is the primary thing that we focus on. That is how we also talking about the community empowerment, which is the core of our idea of running DOCHA. We take into account, and we have various communities working towards DOCHA, and the manufacturing units that we have. We empower the Dalit communities, Dalit women and women groups from various different communities, and we also have marginalized communities working for us in our manufacturing units, and we give them more skills to enhance their livelihoods and enhance their capabilities when it comes to increasing and enhancing their quality of life overall. Thanks.
Yeah, that sounds great, and I think I really mean this when I say I think you found a new future consumer in me. So thank you so much for that, and I would like to ask you a follow-up question as well. So when we spoke before, you said you don't really consider yourself a young person anymore. You know, you're like a little bit older now, but you started as an entrepreneur when you were 19,
right?
And so I can imagine that really, it introduced a lot of challenges for you. So I wanted to ask you, was it hard as a young person to become an entrepreneur and to be taken serious? Did you experience any hurdles, any barriers? And perhaps could you provide some examples to paint a picture for us a bit? Thank you.
So when I was 19 and pursuing my engineering degree, so I come from a working class family. So having a business was a far-fetched idea. And the major hurdle was coming within the family. And so I had to convince the family first, so that, yes, I'm taking this as my career option as well, and also was taking my studies alongside. So that was a major hurdle in itself. However, when it came to doing business and practicing business or establishing a business, the major concern was the people in the authority, bureaucracy, or even the community not taking us seriously when it came to establishing a business. So that came as a surprise for me in a way, because I thought it would be much more easier when the money is put down, when the idea is in the papers and ready to be executed. However, that was not the case, and the older generation were very much skeptical about how we would run a business or how we take care of the financial sustainability part of the businesses. So from bureaucracy to the community, there were major hurdles. As simple as leasing a land was very much hard. So whenever we used to scour for a land to lease, people would be very skeptical about whether or not they would be able to pay rent, or even though we would tell them that we would give them advance of X many months, they would still be skeptical about they're not going to do it in long term, or they had major skepticism when it came to running a business and financially sustaining it. So yeah, those were the major hurdles, I would say. So in terms of policy also, there were not many things that we could do when I started. So that was a major setback when it came to, being a young person in his late teenage and starting a business.
And so when you think of these challenges that you faced and you overcame, what do you think young entrepreneurs like yourself in the past need to flourish, and who can help you with this? I mean, I know it's a broad question, but
right.
Still would like to ask it to you.
So I think majorly the country, Nepal in itself is ran by older generation. As Rinaldi said, he is the youngest in his workplace. I think in our government as well, old people run the younger state or a younger country where our median age is only 24.6, and that raises the question whether or not people are, like, aware of, the older generation is aware of how we can utilize this youth force and how you can utilize this energy to flourish, right? So I would say there has been a few things that has been going on pretty well, from UN agencies to state level agencies to government agencies. And there has been various programs that are run. I was a part of a UNDP run youth collab, which was a great eye opener for me and gave me so much opportunities. And there are other few which are also running in the country right now. But major takeaways would be starting an innovation hub or incubation centers for youth to ideate and give more space to their ideation, and talk about more youth activism and how we can engage all the youth in various different fields. Alongside that, I think including how we can make space for youth in our curriculums and how we can change that by having a quick addition to our curriculums would also foster and give the youth to chance to flourish, be it in business, be it in climate change, be it in gender equality, or whichever field they choose to work with.
Thank you so much. And just reminding all the participants as well, I still have a few questions for the panelists, but in the meanwhile, if you have any questions, do let us know and we will ask them to the participants, the panelists. So now I would like to turn again to Vishal. So I was wondering, can you explain to the participants here a little bit more about about your organization, right? So what types of objectives does it have? And how do you work with young people? And I think I have some follow-up questions for you as well, but I think there's some really interesting learnings that we can take from this. So yeah, if you could please enlighten us. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin, for that. So I'm part of two organizations, and both work on essentially the same objective. So it's the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change and the World's Youth for Climate Justice. And so our objective, the main objective that we are working towards, is seeking an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on climate change. So this is a very legal, from the very outset, you'd say this is a very legal campaign. So our rationale is that climate change is a very cross-cutting issue. It's affecting all of us in a variety of ways. And in order to reach a solution to this, we need a whole of society approach to this. And so you have the political community working, you have the diplomatic, you have the scientific community, everyone's working. So you need the legal community as well. You need the law or to utilize the law in order to achieve some, or in a way that can help address the climate crisis. And so what we're looking for is to discuss climate change through the lens of human rights. So all our human rights that we enjoy are being affected by climate change in one way or the other. And so there needs to be a remedy for this. And so what we're campaigning for is for an opinion from the International Court of Justice that can clarify what are the obligations of states towards current and future generations in protecting their rights from the adverse effects of climate change, rights that are affected by the adverse effects of climate change. And so this campaign is run on a number of fronts. You have the diplomatic front that needs to go through the UN General Assembly, but more towards the grassroots level, to the community level, is we're trying to build this consciousness among young people to understand. While there is already understanding on climate change, we're trying to build this understanding on how climate change is affected, is interlinked with human rights. So there's this nexus that they both share. And then it's important to understand and realize that everyone's human rights are being affected by climate change, and there needs to be this human solution to this. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. So at the grassroots level, we have 4 chapters across 4 Pacific Island countries. That's in Fiji, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and Tonga. And we mostly work with young people, university students, or basically anyone, any young person, even high school students, secondary school students, they're interested in the campaign. And we're trying to what we call educate and activate young people. So there's always this desire for young people to be involved, to be engaged, and they're all very concerned about climate change, but they need this space to be able to utilize or to show their work or how they can be involved. And so in order for us to help them find this platform, we need to first educate them on all of this broad thematic areas, specifically in our case, human rights and climate change, and then to activate their consciousness towards this, and so that they can be agents of change wherever they go. So we'll do a couple of activities through our chapters, but I maybe could share this a bit later on. And we've run a couple of activities as well to get people to understand this very complex nexus between climate and human rights and how we can go about doing this.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, and I encourage everyone here to have a look at the websites of these organizations. What I found especially interesting also is the type of support, the kind of support that you were able to get, not only, I mean, activating all these young people, but even from the really expert international legal community, right? So I think that's some really interesting learnings for us there as well. So maybe we can dive deeper into those perhaps a bit more if there are questions. But I would really want to ask you a similar question that I asked other speakers, but what are some of the challenges you face in your work as a young person and as working with young people? And how did you overcome these challenges?
Sure. So I touched on this briefly. So one of the challenges that we normally face is in our campaign, and just maybe this is quite specific to our work, is that because the nature of our campaign is quite legal and quite technical, it can be a put off for young people to join quite often, because young people, it's very legal, so it appeals to only the legal law students or those already in the legal fraternity. But you would want not just them to be involved, you want a broad spectrum of young people, essentially everyone, to be involved in this. And so explaining the campaign, why this is all necessary, why this linkage between human rights and climate change is so necessary. And you see the work that B+HR does and a couple of other NGOs do. They're quite important. And it's now necessary for us to bring that message, bring those learnings down to young people so that they can understand. And not everyone goes and reads a report from what the CHR does or what the Human Rights Council does. And so it's important that we at the grassroots level are able to take these lessons, and however they're relevant to the work we do, and pass it down to young people. And so getting this message to them has always been a challenge. One way we've tried to navigate through this is young people have their own ways that they like to be reached. So what we did was we created an animation video, essentially. It's on our website if you'd like to have a watch of it. It's 2 minutes long, but it explains the whole advisory opinion campaign in an animated format that a young person, regardless of age, would be able to understand. So it's this bringing down of this very broad, very complex campaign into a 2-minute video that can explain it to young people. And so everywhere we've campaigned internationally and locally, we've brought this video with us that helps set the scene quite well. Another thing we did was we launched, in the Solomon Islands, this was shot and produced, we launched a music video that was also quite popular among young people. So it had this message of our campaign while showcasing the reality of climate change in the music video. It was able to showcase our message and reach these young people. And we've done similar things. We've ran art competitions, we've ran social media competitions. All of this are geared towards passing this message to young people in a way, in a format, through a platform that is more conducive to them rather than mainstream, because they're not there on your newspaper. They don't read newspaper. Young people don't read newspapers. They don't read long articles. Well, most of them from what we say. So it's to reach the broader community, young people community. This is something we've done. And just briefly, also another challenge that we've come across is that because we're young people, our organization is all led by young people, it sometimes it's a challenge because people don't take you seriously. And when you take on this challenge to go to the International Court of Justice, a lot of people see you with skepticism because they say, how can you do that? It's such an ambitious campaign, such a huge thing to do. How will you be able to do this? And so it sometimes is a challenge. Sometimes it can be quite intimidating. Sometimes it can be quite daunting to face this. But and we've discussed this earlier. I think one way we've tried to do this, show our credibility, show that we deserve, we can have a seat and effectively contribute to the discussions. What we normally like to say is that we use this two-pronged approach. You look inward and then you present outward. So when you say look inward, it means that even though you have this skepticism, you have this criticism, you have people saying all the negatives around you, you need to build yourself. As young people, there's always space for us to build ourselves. So that means looking inwardly and how you can develop yourself in order to produce quality work. So and this has worked well for us. That when you produce quality work, you are cementing your credibility out there for other people. So while you still may be young, if people see your work and see the quality and the authenticity and the credibility in your work, it automatically builds your respect, builds your reputation, and it's honestly, it's worked for us. So people who didn't take us seriously, after a year maybe, or after some time, when they've seen us, seen our work, they've seen what we have been able to do, they come back to us and they have a completely different tone towards us. So I think it helps when you build yourself, look inwardly, and then present that outwardly as well.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's definitely something, for the participants here, but also for young people. I mean, all the reflections you made to keep in mind. And actually, I want to zoom in on one thing you said, because you mentioned very briefly the word cynical among young people. So I just wanted to, ask you the following, and with a little bit of context. So like the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, right? So these guidelines were developed by Professor John Ruggie. He was a special representative for the Secretary General of the UN. What he said is he kind of compared business and human rights to climate change. And he looked at climate change to see how can we address business and human rights issues, because there are similarities on many fronts. And he called climate change a so-called wicked problem, right? So it's a huge problem of huge scale that's very difficult to solve. And now my point is the following. One of the, like within the business and human rights world, another expert in the field, he said, we really need, so with these wicked problems, we cannot solve these problems in one day, right? Progress is always, slow but steady, perhaps. At the same time, we need to keep people engaged. We need to keep civil society actors engaged, because if we do not, they stop pushing for change, right? And so my question to you now is, and perhaps we can draw some lessons from this climate change discourse to business and human rights, is do young people you work with ever become cynical, right? And what can we do to keep them on the table? Or maybe is this not an issue? So that's what I would like to ask you. Thank you.
To be honest, it is for a certain group of people, it does become a point where they become disengaged, whether they drop out and they move on. But for us in the Pacific, we actually have some. You will find some people, but for majority of them, it's the matter of climate change and these big issues, specifically climate change, is a matter of life and a matter of survival for them. And so this is what is the driving motivation for many young people to join these campaigns, to support and to find a voice and to find a place in this. And it goes back to this. So if motivation comes from sources like this, then the chances of people dropping out, people being cynical, even though progress is very slow, as you've seen from COP and all of these other formal spaces. But it's this desire, that's motivation that, hey, you have so much to lose if you don't do anything. And so you don't have a second option. You don't have a chance to just rest on your laurels and just be cynical about everything, because you have to keep trying, because you have so much to lose. And if you're from climate vulnerable countries and from the Pacific or other regions in the world that are affected by climate change as severely as this, you will realize that you don't have, as I said, you don't have a second option. And so you only have this one thing, you have to keep fighting. And so I guess for young people, to keep them engaged, it's to utilize the mechanisms that young people are most common with, most familiar with. And so that way, if you're doing that, you are automatically engaging young people. And so use social media, there's a lot of online tools right now that are available, and you could do this even in times of COVID. We've seen that even though you're not able to gather, you're not able to meet people, but you can, to a certain degree, keep young people engaged in the virtual space. And so there's a lot of things out there that we can do to keep people engaged. And I think it's just a matter of finding what works best. And in terms of motivation, I guess, if for us in the global south and for many vulnerable countries, it's not a matter of being cynical and being disengaged.
I like it. It's a message of hope. That's great. And with this again leads us then back to Arnaldi, because of course, like with climate change, it's really acknowledged that governments, they play a leading role. And putting this all into the context of our conversations about engaging young people and working with young people and actively and meaningfully involving them, like Rinaldi, in your view, what role can governments play in doing this and including young people meaningfully? Yeah, if you could please provide us some reflections, that would be great.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I think all of us agree that young generation is supremely important to drive the change. As also Vishal mentioned earlier, that young people can help also tackle the issue of climate change and political economic issue. Personally, I think government is largely responsible to ensure youth engagement in political, economic, and social life. Government, with all their powers and resource, has capability to empower young generation. Thus, political willingness and political affirmation to develop young generation from the leader is supremely important. Based on my experience, there are several ways that government can do to better accommodate the youth needs and develop their capabilities. First and foremost, the government needs to provide access for the young generation to express what their needs, what their problems, and also their aspiration to grow, as well as access to be a part of the institution. As I previously mentioned before, in the state-owned enterprises, we have the youth association, to empower the young generation in the state-owned enterprises. We provide mentorship, coaching programs for the young talents. And then for the young talent who is not working in the state-owned enterprises, we also have an internship program. This internship program aims to link and match between education and industry needs and prepare the young generation to enter the job markets. Second, government need to ensure that young people are fairly represented because they are the one that know the problem, the challenge itself. And that is one of the reasons why we support the youth leadership and set the target 15% of young talent under 40 to sit in on the board of director. Our institution aims to empower young generation, prepare their future, because we are aware that young generation are the future generations. We review age limit and restriction to reduce the barriers of young generations to become a leader in the company, ranging from acceleration program to the enhancement of merit system that emphasize the competency, not the age. Lastly, the government also needs to encourage, recognize, and support new form of youth participation in the development process. Either it's startup movement or the civil society movement. Nowadays, also there are many startups from the young generation that aims to ease the problem of the society. We support them also by providing financial access. If the startups is already developed, we have state-owned venture capitalists that are ready to invest. So I think that's the three important action that government can do to empower the young generations.
Great, thank you so much. We're already getting into recommendations, so that's really good to see, and hope that all the participants are listening to these recommendations as well. I would like to ask you a follow-up question. So you've worked with young people like your colleagues within the government, or perhaps people that that you don't work there with directly. But could you provide us maybe some examples of how that these young people changed something within the government for the better?
Yes, of course. In Indonesia, the clear example of how the young people can make something different in the government can be seen from the election of Nadiem Makarim as a Minister of Education. He is still 37 years old. Then he was a former CEO of Gojek, Indonesia largest ride-sharing startup. He has many breakthroughs in the education sectors because he comes from the private sector. He has new ideas. He has expertise in the digital industry as well. So when the pandemic COVID-19 hit us in Indonesia, it can be argued that our education system is quite stable because the minister can directly transform the face-to-face classes system to the online learning. And the other example from what is his big breakthrough is the freedom of learning program that aims to give teacher the autonomy to select the learning method that they find most suitable for their students. So it changed from the strict methods learning to the more flexible, to more open. And then also for the university student, this policy also give them opportunity to learn outside the study programs and campuses for up to 3 semesters by choosing internship, independent study, research, humanity, project, rural development, etc. It means that the undergraduate student, the university student nowadays can choose what he want to do in the what he want to learn in the to also get a credit in the university. So it changes. And in the state-owned enterprises, Minister Tohil also very supportive to the young generation. He invited best talent to join state-owned enterprises. He recruited Fajrin Rashid from Bukalapak, it's Indonesia e-commerce startup, and also Soleh Ayubi from the United Healthcare Group in the USA. The participation of young generation in Indonesia SOEs brings many new ideas, innovation culture, and breakthrough for the better SOEs. The reason why Minister Thohir also selected the young person, Fajrin Rashid, as a director of digital business in the Indonesia's telecommunication company, because he wants to transform these state-owned enterprises into digital company. From that story, we can see that the young generation can make something different, can make something big because they have a new idea that's still fresh, and it can be a breakthrough for the old system of the government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rinaldi. And we'll come back to you for some recommendations to the participants here with us today. But now I would like to go back to An. And An, you spoke all at the beginning, and we heard a lot from the other panelists. So now I would like to ask you. So we've heard a lot about how young people can influence policies. What is their role? How can be supported to influence these policies? Can you provide some issues or some examples where you think young people can really make a change?
Yeah. So I come from a predominantly academic and research background. So I think that is where I think, well, personally, for my very biased opinion, that's where young people can make a lot of change. Because I guess a lot of the young generations in their education, they're exposed to a lot of new ideas. Like we read a lot of news, we are exposed to so much media. So I think our experience are very interdisciplinary. So, why the older generation maybe get very well trained in one disciplines, I think we tend to be more open to, new disciplines and then new ideas, new ways of doing. So I think one very particular example is that there are, they tend to have like the young generations being very well versed in quantitative methods, so like very good with data analysis in general, right? But also very good with like social issues and like the understanding of it. So I think that bridge between more technical aspect of how to do things, and then bridge with like what is there to do is very important. And for example, in my work, I do a lot of work on a lot of like mapping and like GIS applications on, you know, like visualizing how inequality has built up in cities, and then how health is centralized, and then how health services are visualized in cities. And then I think that really bridged the gap between like science and policies. So I think that's is one of the contribution that we can make. And I guess not only in pure academia though, there are many other opportunities where I think the interdisciplinary that we have learned in our day, like, you know, educations can contribute in business. For example, I think Vietnam and a lot of other like Asia Pacific countries are mainly like a lot very strong economically on manufacturing, right? So having a generations of engineers or technical person having more well-versed in like social knowledge can also be, you know, helpful as well. Like they would know what are the problems existing in their business, and they having, you know, having that knowledge, contributing to be the voice and trying to make change within their own business, and then having a more generalized change in the wider society. I think that also be another contribution that the generational difference can make. And I think another difference that young people can bring to the policy table is that we also very well aware of our surroundings. So I do reflect with other participants, the panelists talk about how we need to bring youth into the policy making, and then but I think we also really need to have more localized knowledge as well, because I think what I realized, because Vietnam are not very frontal, like we're not the most vulnerable places for climate change, for example. I think there are disconnection between like what we see, what we experience every day, and then the agenda of sustainable development in the country. Many people don't see that connections in their daily work. So I think the power of youth is to bridge that difference, to see where the localized knowledge come from, where is the problems of sustainable development in your own area, and then to tell people that this is a problem, right? Like it's not only the mountains where tree cutting are the problem, where like deforestation is happening, but in the cities there are other problems of segregation, of income disparity is happening, but people don't really make that connection to wider sustainable issues. So I think the role of youth is to bridging that disparity.
Great, thank you so much. That was really great, and it spurred some ideas in me as well. But I really want to move on so we can maybe also address one of the questions from the panel. And I have a few more questions for all of you. Shagan, I wanted to turn to you. You're when we were speaking the other day, you told me your age and the position you're in, and you're in a very senior position for your age, right? I was really impressed. And so that's why I really wanted to ask you as well. And it's a similar question that other panelists have been asked: are there any barriers for young people like yourself when it comes to decision making and convincing people within or outside your organization? And could you provide some examples, perhaps?
Sure. One of the things I started doing early on, and I started doing that, for example, when I went for my master's also, because I was the youngest person in my cohort. I was 20 years old when I was doing my master's. Everyone else was like in their late 20s or whatever. I stopped telling people my age and I let them assume what they wanted to assume. And I know that's not a good solution. I know that's not something I would even champion. But it was almost like I was passing for someone who was 27 or 28. And even today, like a lot of people think that when they talk to me, because they take me more seriously when they think I'm older, right? And they think that, well, she can lead this project because she's almost 30 years old. And then they get the shock of their lives when they realize, well, I've just turned 23, like a couple of months ago. And so it's shameful, to be honest. That's the word I would use, that just because of a number, you're defining the capability that I have, or that a lot of other young people have. And I know that that's a reason why a lot of us, for example, don't have a voice on important platforms, because we are told that, well, you don't have experience, you don't have the years under you, and so on and so forth. And here's what I say, and what is my message to the world. You know, when oil was discovered many, many years ago, it was like life-changing, and, you know, our lives took a turn 360 degrees and whatever it was. I think that the superpower of the world that we live in today and right now is the youth, because we're living in a world which has a very large young population. And if we don't harness the energy that young people have, and if we keep saying that the youth is the future, which I disagree with, because I think young people are the present and the future. So if we don't acknowledge that young people are the present, we don't bring them to decision-making tables, what we're doing is we're delaying the kind of progress that can happen. We're delaying the ripple effects of bringing this energy to decision-making tables. And by that, why that's important is because of 2-3 reasons. And I agree with Anne when she said that, you know, we bring this local perspective to this new global that has opened up for us. But also because I think we are not saying we know everything. I've never, in fact, met a young person, even if you look at Greta, for example, or you look at any other young person, we've never said we know everything. Just, you know, just sit down and listen to us. What we're saying is, you know, and you have the experience, so teach us, but we have this energy and we don't want to sit at home and just play video games. So tell us what we can do to make this world a better place. And that passion, that kind of raw drive, where so many of us are working voluntarily, we're working unpaid, and we're happy to do it. Is not being channelized. We're not bringing these people to important decision-making tables, to important organizations where these conversations can take place. And therefore, the decisions we're taking are also inherently not addressing the fact that young people are the present. We're not just going to create decisions for the future, we're creating decisions for our now. And even, for example, with business and human rights, that's very important, right? I have experience working with the Business and Human Rights Resource Center as well, and this is like the core of my work. But that's the thing. We cannot just expect this change, like Professor Raghi used to say, top down. This also has to come bottom up. And what that means is, when you have young people work as associates and consultants and, you know, research analysts and whatever it is in different organizations, if we all imagine this, and I, you know, urge all our participants to imagine this, if all young people across the world, whether it's from an Amazon to a, you know, ExxonMobil or whatever it is, if all of us start rallying that, well, we're not going to accept these conditions for workers in minorities, we're not going to work for these organizations. Well, are workers then going to come from Mars? No, organizations will have to listen to us because we're the people doing their everyday jobs, right? And so it is so crucial to empower young people with the ability and the voice to speak up when they see injustice. And for that, like I said before when I was speaking, we need to open the door. We need to drag a chair whenever you see a table and be there even if you're not wanted. Because I say this often, no is not the right answer. So whenever, you know, someone used to say this to me, and it sounds really problematic, but I'll give you context. Whenever someone used to say, well, you can't do this because you're too young, or no, you don't have experience, I believe this very strongly. No is just a yes that's going to come later. So if they said no to me right now, in another 6 months, they're going to say yes to me. And that's because I'm not going to stop working, right? And so no is just not the right answer. This is to all young people who are listening. If you've ever been, you know, if the door's ever been closed on your face and there's no seat on the table, drag one, break a window, make your space, because you're the one living in this world and you need your voice to be heard.
Thank you so much, Shagun. Very eloquently put. So I have a final question for everyone. I would like to ask you, please keep it to 1 or 2 minutes so that we can go to some of the questions that I see are coming in. So yeah, please again, 1 or 2 minutes. The same question for everyone. And I'll start with Watsal because we haven't heard from you in a while. So do you have, apart from the ones you already gave, do you have any other recommendations for the participants here today with us, mainly UN agencies and civil society organizations, on how to leverage youth as a power for change?
So I would say a few things. for youth and for the agencies as well. So I think for the youth, it would be majorly influential if there will be a essence of involving the communities in their work or even their work procedures and operations. That goes to the agencies as well. If involving the communities, being more contextual of how to work out things can be done, and engaging more youth. And for the youth, it would be it's a learning process, and when you have the time, it's experiential learning. So like learning by doing is the key to go. And making space for change, making space for the youth to have the decision making roles in various different organizations, and organizational changes should be done for making those spaces to the youth, so that they become more they have more decision making capabilities and put in those roles. And also, just to sum it up, just for the youth, just have fun while you're doing it. Yeah, that would be my giveaways.
Thank you so much. So, An, can I turn to you? What would be your recommendation to the participants today?
Yeah, I think I probably have two. Considering the environment of, let's say, specifically Vietnam in particular, where human rights is a very, I guess, sensitive topic. I would say I would love to have a more protective environment where, doing youth activists, for example, because there are, sometimes talking about environmental issues that's clash with other economic interests of like stakeholders or, government agencies, other bigger companies, I would say. And then because of the political environment we're in, sometimes we don't feel super safe in saying what we want to say. So, like I think in international organizations and the UN in particular can help foster environments where it is more secure, and then is more inspired, like accommodating of our need for privacy. And then I think the second thing is reach more to the mass population, I would say. So the programs maybe, like it's easier to reach, I would say the top students. Like it's easier to reach the one who already somewhat informed, but I think it takes a lot more work to reach to the one who are the more common, like the mass, the majority. So I think that's need to work a lot with like the government and, especially with educations, with Ministry of Educations at various local levels, need to get into more extracurricular activities or mandatory system maybe. But yeah, I think that would be my 2 points.
Great, thank you so much. And then if we could move to, let's see, Rinaldi.
Hi, yes. I think to empower and leverage youth as a power of change, we should work closely. We should work hand in hand, ranging from the government, business industry, to civil society, to develop the roadmap of the youth development, which also align with the sustainable development agenda. We need to have a clear roadmap for youth development to face tremendous challenge in the future, and I hope also United Nations agency can facilitate and develop it, because there are many challenges in the future. We need to aware about the climate change, as Ann and Xiahun has mentioned before, and also we need to aware about the challenge of telemigrants, robotic, automation, etc. If we don't have any clear roadmap, it will cause a wider gap in our society. So we need to anticipate it. We need to tackle it, and then I also hope that UN and also the CSO can provide more skills development program for the youth, and also encourage the government to strengthen the implementation and coordination of youth policies. Lastly, as Vishal Prasad mentioned before, that we need to penetrate to a more comfortable platform for the young generation. So I hope that in the future, this kind of event can be more aggressive, penetrated into new platforms such as podcast, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, etc. And we are very open to collaborate in the state-owned enterprises to make it happen. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. A lot to unpack there as well. But first, maybe let's go to Vishal. Vishal, do you have any recommendations to the participants today?
Yeah, I would agree with what everyone has said before me. But maybe just two more points I'd like to add, and this is mainly for UN agencies and institutions that are here. I guess in order to leverage young people and get them involved, and because there's these huge, very important agencies, I think one way these agencies, we all can do this is if we have young people reaching out to young people. I think it's more effective, it's more useful, and it provides this great bridge if young people from agencies are reaching out to young people. So it means we need to be putting more young people into positions, more young people into these formal spaces where they can then provide this different perspective, but also be this bridge to the other young people, other youth that are out there. So that's one thing I'd suggest. And the second is that and this is something we face here, is that a lot of UN agencies, they do great work, but it's very difficult for the ordinary young person and these ordinary grassroots campaigns that are run for them to understand what these UN agencies are doing and how they're operating and how they can add value to the work that these young people are doing on the ground. So maybe if some work can be undertaken in simplifying the work that these agencies do and how they can help grassroots campaigns, how they can help young people, and how also young people can fit into the work that these agencies are doing, and so that there is this clear communication, clear understanding. Oh, I can be a part of this agency because they're doing this and they can support me in this way, or the work, the agents of change or the change that I'm trying to lead, they can help me in this way. And so it's this idea of communication, making messaging simple so that people can understand how these agencies operate and how they can fit into what we're doing.
Thank you so much. And then before we head to the questions of the participants, I would like to turn to Shagan. Shagan, do you have anything to add to this impressive body of recommendations that has already been given?
Sure. I mean, I agree with everyone. First of all, if we do all of these things, we would live in a much better world. A couple of things. Two things for organizations. One is the way it exists right now is that we see a lot of youth bodies as part of big organizations. So, for example, you see Amnesty International having a youth wing. You see the UN having youth wings. I fundamentally disagree with that. And I know that that might sound really radical, but I think that's fundamentally problematic. Because young people are not, it's like, you have a program for WASH or you have a program for equality. You don't have a program for young people. Young people have to be flat and across the organization. So we have to be a part of all teams rather than having one team for young people and then just shoving it to the side and, kind of treating it as foot soldiers. And that's what exists right now. We have all of these organizations having youth groups, except those youth groups have to do all the work of every part of the organization. So rather than having a youth group, have youth in every group. That's recommendation number one. Number two that I would give is, how like many years ago, because of the gender divide and feminism and the radical wave that came, we stopped looking at gender as part of resumes for people and we started looking at just the qualifications. Let's also stop looking at age. Because the minute we do that, the minute we stop looking at the age that someone has, I can guarantee that if on my resume I had the age of 30 and not 23, I would be sitting in a very different position when I had applied, right? And if we stop looking at age as a number, we usher in this generation of young people to these positions where we're not saying we don't want to learn. We want to learn, but we also will have the energy to implement what we learn. And like Vishal was saying right now, we'll also then have the power to engage with more and more youth and invite them into these kind of conversations. Those are two for organizations. When it comes to young people, and I know that you spoke a little bit about cynicism and other things like that in and around this topic. One of the things I think is there isn't a dearth of issues that we can focus on, right? There are so many problems. Like, literally, if we just open our eyes and look around us, there are so many problems around us in society that need action. And so my message to young people is just start somewhere. Like Vishal was saying and others were saying, just open your eyes. It could be a simple Instagram reel or a TikTok video that you start making. It could be a small campaign that you do to clean up your community. There are problems everywhere. And with this, COVID-19 pandemic, one of the upsides has been that there's this new public space that has opened up, which is this digital space. And so this means that you now have a different platform, a different public space where you are not treated as an, unequal because of your gender or race or, your culture, whatever it is. This is a space that you can truly own and occupy. And so my message to young people is occupy that space. Take that chair and use your voice. Because the future is not waiting for us.
Thank you so much. Again, very great reflections, and we have some 5, max 10 minutes left. So I'd like to raise a question from the audience, from Linka. And her question is, and please perhaps raise your hand if you're interested in answering this question. If I see no hands, I'll just ask someone to reflect perhaps, but let's see. She asks, if you could swap your roles with some key decision makers, policy makers, or leaders of institutions, how would you engage with young people? So what would you do if you were in a position of power? I'm not sure if anyone wants to reflect on that. Sure, Shagan, go ahead.
Like I was saying right now, like one of the things I would do is obviously have more young people in these positions. But I think another thing that's very important is to also recognize the work that young people do through our organizations, right? And not just see them as volunteers and as interns and whatever it is. So if I had to swap my position as one, leader, I would truly open up organizations as they exist, invite more young people to consult on documents like we did, for example, with our WASH resolution, which we as One-Child World presented to UN Water, was that bring young people and their opinions and their locales to this global policy that you're trying to make. So that's one small change. And these are not even big policy level changes I'm talking about. Very small changes to have consulting groups where young people are invited into conversation so that that training that's required, when Vishal was saying that a lot of the work that he's doing right now requires a lot of legal jargon, that training will happen on the job. And so you're doing as you're learning, as you're bringing change. And so that's one thing that we can start with.
Thank you. And I see we have another question from Ben. And Vishal, I think this is a good question for you since you're such an active campaigner. So Ben asks, have any of you, or Vishal, have you experienced any backlash when you have campaigned? And what is the security and protection that we need to include in our programs and support? And perhaps you can also draw on, colleagues that that campaign and gone into perhaps some unsafe situations. If you, for example, have not. I'm not sure if you, would want to reflect.
Yeah, just very briefly, that is a real concern when you're working on human rights, when you're working on climate change. It does become a concern because there's sometimes you might you might cross a line that you were not supposed to. And so you need these protections and you need this support. Personally, I have not come across such a situation, thankfully. And I'm the colleagues that I've worked with, I'm not aware of any as well, but we've recently started work in both organizations. In organization I work with, is that to draw up mechanisms, draw up support that is already existing. If in the event you have, say, a campaigner, a young person that finds himself or herself in trouble, what is the plan then? How do we go about doing this? And that means looking at support from, say, lawyers, looking at support from other NGOs, other entities that can provide support, and just having all of that ready in place so that you have a plan to fall back to when this happens. So there's some work that we're currently doing on that. And so I guess my response would be that it's just, and for young people, it should not be a barrier to go ahead. Obviously, your protection support is obviously very important, but I guess you need to have plans in place, and that's something of what we're doing, and from our experience.
Great, thank you so much. And I'll take one more question from the audience because we're running out of time. And then may I already ask everyone to prepare to put your camera on so we can just make a group picture as well. Okay, so last question from Harris, and it's for Shagun. Does your recommendation of having youth across all platforms instead of one specific platform apply to government organizations as well? For example, having youth in all ministries instead of having a separate youth ministry.
Absolutely. And I love that you asked this question. Absolutely. Because you know what happens right now is when you have these youth ministries, it's like almost saying that let's have a separate government for women. Imagine that, right? You're saying all women leaders cannot campaign in elections, cannot stand for prime minister or president, but there's a separate ministry that exists for women. Who is that going to help? Young people don't exist in echo chambers. We don't exist in, on a different kind of planet. We exist in this real world. And when you have these youth ministries, what you're doing is you're pushing us to a corner where we are only engaging with this echo chamber of other young people who agree with us. And so most of our meetings, and I'm speaking for all of the young people here, most of our meetings is when someone's saying something interesting, and then all of us saying, well, yes, we agree. And that's it, because there's no one who's implementing it. Everyone's nodding, everyone's excited. And so we need young people and youth ministers and young politicians and all of these people as part of main governments, because it's like saying we're second-class citizens when you kind of create this bifurcation. So absolutely, and I love that question.
Thank you so much. Okay, I mean, these were all excellent reflections from you all. I would like to thank you so much to the people in that inserted questions in the chat box. We might not have time to address them now, but in the next session, we will actually have a lot of time to do the questions. Rinaldi, I see you raise your hand.
Maybe just add one small thing, because
yes, of course, please.
Show that Shagun is very attractive to raise the issue of youth. I agree with you, Shagun. As a youth, we can make anything. I mean, we have a resource, we also have the energy, but my point is we also need to learn also from the old generation. So there's a transfer of knowledge, because sometimes we don't have wisdom of the old generation. So the best thing, I think, is the combination between the wisdom of the all senior generation and also from our generation, and we can collaborate hand in hand. Today is the day of collaboration. So if we can collaborate with all elements of nations, we can make a better place for us.
Thank you, Rinaldi, for adding that. And indeed, I think it goes both ways. Young people need to be included meaningfully, but also, I mean, we still have a lot to learn from the generations that came before us. So also good to have that nuance. So yeah, now I would like to want to invite everyone to put on their cameras, and we'll make a group photo of everyone present here today.
Should we come here?
Yeah.
COVID appropriate, not behavior.
Closer.
Maybe I'm gonna have to take this off.
Thank you everyone for turning your videos on. I'll now take a picture. 3, 2, 1, smile. One more. 3, 2, and go. Right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Monica. Actually, if panelists can stay back, and Monica, if you can take a screenshot just for the panelists, that'd be great. Thank you very much. And thank you. We got some really good suggestions from the panel. Thanks very much. You got a scoop and then give space for Kevin.
Right, everyone ready? 3, 2, 1. Got some great ones. Thank you, everyone. Back to you, Kevin.
So what, yeah, actually, I would like to give it to Monica or Pravina. What time do we reconvene again for the next session?
The next session, it starts at 1:30 p.m. ICT. So we are going for a break now.
Great. Well, really looking forward to seeing you all in a bit. And yeah, as said, please write down your questions for the next session. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much, guys. See you.
See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.